Good morning, everybody. I will just share my presentation. Good morning and welcome to our special event today. I'm absolutely thrilled that you are joining us. We have participants from over 20 countries joining us today, including Afghanistan, Brazil, Canada, Colombia, Germany, Kenya, Spain, France, Ghana, India, Japan, Mexico, Niger, Netherlands, Pakistan, Palestine, Saudi Arabia, Sweden, Uganda, Switzerland, and the United States. So thank you all for joining us today. And we're really pleased to share this panel with you. My name is Sapna Sharma. I'm a professor in the Department of Biology at York University, and I will be your chair for today's event. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the many of our partners today for this event, namely OneWater and the Dahdaleh Insitute for Global Health Research, the United Nations Development Program, and the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. And I would also like to take a moment to thank the many, many people working tirelessly behind the scenes to help make this panel happen today. And before we begin, I would like to do our land acknowledgements. York University recognizes that many Indigenous nations have longstanding relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant and agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. If you would like to learn more about the Indigenous communities living in your region, I encourage you to visit the website native-land.ca. And today in this panel, we will learn about the historical context that has led to many Indigenous communities in Canada not having reliable clean water in their homes. In a country of more than 9 million lakes and 20% of the world's freshwater supply, it's unacceptable that in 2023, that remote and Indigenous communities still do not have access to clean water. And with that, I would like to welcome Mr. Alex Mejia, Director of the Division for People and Social Inclusion at the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, who will welcome our special guests for the opening remarks. And I will pass it over to you, Alex.
Thank you, dear Sapna. Thank you, Professor Sharma. It's quite an honor for us at UNiTAR. I'm speaking to you from Geneva, Switzerland. It's a very momentous occasion, what we see here today, mainly thanks to the strong commitment and support from York University. This wouldn't have been possible without you colleagues in Canada. But indeed, in addition to opening properly as you just did, we want to welcome all of you, more than 120 participants from as many countries as you already heard, to this webinar on the occasion of the launch of the Global Water Academy that we have put together under the auspices of the 77th UN General Assembly and its president, who is duly represented here today. In a very short manner, allow me to say that the mission of the Global Water Academy will be to empower policymakers, government officials, industry representatives, civil society stakeholders, and representatives of the communities most affected by water insecurity with the knowledge, expertise, and capacity to ameliorate the water crisis. It will foster, indeed, training and capacity development. It will empower community-based networks. It will weave traditional knowledge and hopefully also inspire innovation to co-create sustainable water solutions and ensure equitable access to water for all. So the Global Water Academy is today a reality, and that reality will be commemorated and celebrated by our two authorities, the chairman of the Board of Trustees of UNiTAR and the honorable president of your university. So without further ado, I would like to invite His Excellency Ambassador Luis Gallegos, former Foreign Minister of the Republic of Ecuador and Chairman of the Board of Trustees of UNiTAR, to take the floor. Excellency, welcome.
Thank you very much, Alex. Madam President Rhonda Linton, Alex Mejia, my especially and very good friend, Director of UNiTAR, Professor Sapna Sharma, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and esteemed colleagues. I stand before you today with appreciation and excitement as we gather here to inaugurate the Global Water Academy, a beacon of hope in our collective pursuit of sustainable water management. This auspicious occasion marks the beginning of a transformative journey, one that is centered on research and capacity building to empower individual institutions to become the change makers of our world needs. Water scarcity and insecurity continue to pose formidable challenges impacting the lives of millions and hindering the progress of countless regions. To tackle this crisis head-on, we must invest in the knowledge, expertise, and skill of those who hold the power to effect change. It is for this very reason that the Global Water Academy has been established, to empower policy and decision makers, government officials, industry leaders, and communities most affected by water insecurity. And it comes to fruition under the auspices of the President of the 77th United Nations General Assembly, ensuring the guidance of our highest political body and embracing of the global spirit. The leadership of His Excellency President Kaba Korasi has made it possible, and we will remain grateful to him for the many years to come. Our mission is clear: to equip individuals with the tools they need to ameliorate the water crisis and foster collaboration and knowledge sharing, and to co-create sustainable solutions that ensure equitable access to water for all. The Global Water Academy will serve as a global hub for training, capacity development, and empowerment, transcending borders and disciplines to build a network of passionate individuals dedicated to water sustainability. Our mission is clear: our mission is very clear. I would like to extend my gratitude to the University of York for being the founder partner of the Global Water Academy. This would not have been possible without the personal involvement of President Rhonda Linton and an impressive team of her prestigious university. Particular recognition goes to Vice President Professor Amir Asif, Vice President of the Research and Innovation, and to Associate Professor Sapna Sharma, who have helped our team at UNiTAR to put together the basic foundations of the global initiative. In addition, I would like to welcome our esteemed academic partners, including the University of Victoria, Georgia Tech, Nova School, the University of Philippines, who are willing to commit their expertise to this cause, shaping our training programs and curriculum. And to our future private sector partners, AB InBev, Diageo, Danone, Heineken, and Pernod Ricard, our admiration for your commitment toward capacity building and sustainability. In our first year, the Global Water Academy will seek to achieve ambitious goals focused on capacity building and training, laying the groundwork for a sustainable future. Operationally, we will establish the organizational and governance structure necessary to drive our mission forward, ensuring that seamless collaboration between academia, government, industry, and affected communities. By partnering with our esteemed academic institutions, we will start delivering face-to-face training and will also develop and launch the Global Training e-platform on water, offering a diverse range of courses that address critical aspects of water management. Through the Global Water Academy, individuals will have the opportunity to engage in a hybrid way of learning, combining in-person and online activities that transcend geographical boundaries. This unique approach will enable participants to collaborate, exchange ideas, and pull their collective expertise, fostering a global network of change makers committed to addressing the water crisis. By focusing on capacity building, we empower individuals to become catalysts of change within their respective communities and sectors. We We will aspire to do this in a full coordination with other United Nations agencies currently working on water issues to add value to their existing knowledge portfolio and in a complementary way that will avoid duplications of efforts. We understand that knowledge without action is merely an abstraction. That is why the Global Water Academy is dedicated to bridging the gap between theory and practice. Our training program will be rooted in scientific research and evidence-based approaches, ensuring that participants develop the political skills needed to implement sustainable water solutions. Furthermore, our commitment to monitoring and measuring impact will enable us to promote the replication of successful practices and contribute to evidence-based decision-making. To this, our academic partners will add a wealth of research papers and other publications that will cement the Global Water Academy's reputation as a unique institution of learning throughout the years. Ladies and gentlemen, the Global Water Academy should not be merely an institution. It should become a movement, a global initiative that empowers, transforms, and inspires. Together, we will build a future where capacity building and training are at the forefront of our efforts to achieve water security and sustainable development. Through our collective dedication and unwavering commitment, we will create a world where every individual has the knowledge and skills to safeguard our precious resource, water, for generations to come. Thank you for this honor. It has been a pleasure.
Thanks to you, Excellency. Just to simply echo your words, our recognition indeed goes to the visionary support of His Excellency Shava Korosi, who is the one that has motivated us to come together to put together this initiative. He was indeed present in the previous meeting with Mr. Nikhil Seth and President Rhonda Lenton, and he has sent us a message yesterday also expressing his support. So the whole of the UN machinery works in a very coordinated manner. And as you have said, we aim to establish full coordination within the system to support the water and several other agencies working on water, but very much so connect with the academic world under the leadership of the University of York. So with that, we thank Ambassador Gallegos, and now it's my great privilege to offer the floor to President Rhonda Lenton of the University of York, who, on top of being a champion for this global initiative, also hosts one of the United Nations training centers that UNiTAR runs called CIFAL York, one of 31 around the world, and one that indeed excels, Madam President, if I can say, thanks to your support and that of your colleagues. Without further ado, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Alex, and good morning, afternoon, everyone. Bonjour, bonjour. I just want to first acknowledge President Shava Korosi, Mr. Nikhil Seth, and Ambassador Louis Gallegos for inviting me to join today's event. It is a pleasure to be here as we kick off the launch of the Global Water Academy, led in partnership by the United Nations, York University, and others. As we speak, there are over 600 active wildfires raging across Canada, marking the worst season on record for wildfires in Canada's history. And I'm sure that some of our American partners have witnessed firsthand the effects of Canada's wildfires as the winds have carried the smoke to the southern states. The devastation resulting from these wildfires, which are frequently brought on by extreme weather events, such as lightning, warming temperatures, and extended dry periods, is profound, impacting people and the planet, from polluting the air quality and making it dangerous to breathe. These wildfires are displacing animals, driving communities of people out of their homes, and destroying vegetation and crops. It also has an impact on water sustainability. Wildfires produce black carbon, which is making its way into our fresh waters, impacting aquatic life and increasing acidification of our lakes and rivers. The absence of vegetation also puts regions at risk of flooding during heavy rains and threatens to compromise drinking water. These wildfires, while just one example of how extreme weather events can have global repercussions, serves as an urgent reminder of how climate change and water sustainability go hand in hand. When we announced the Water Academy last March, I shared how water sustainability is not just about climate change. It is also an equity issue, as we know that water sustainability does not impact us all equally. We must collaborate across diverse perspectives and disciplines to identify solutions that will ensure the safety and wellness of us all, but particularly for at-risk populations, Black and Indigenous populations, children, and the Global South. This is the mission of the Global Water Academy, and a key part of the discussions you will participate in today as you examine humanitarian responses to the emerging climate response in relation to extreme weather events. We know that these complex global intersectional challenges cannot be solved by one person, one organization, or country. It takes the support and commitment of many to drive the kind of lasting positive change needed to protect the future for people and the planet. York is honored to be the academic host for the Global Water Academy. As a leading international teaching and research institution committed to serving the public good, we have over 30 faculty members who are currently working across 80 research projects to advance water sustainability and water research. To begin the virtual panel, Humanitarian Responses to Emerging Water Crises as a Result of Extreme Climatic Events, I would like to turn things back to Professor Sapna Sharma. But before doing so, let me just share with you that Dr. Sharma is a York Research Chair in Global Change Biology. Her research highlights how lakes worldwide respond to climate change. She has been named one of Canada's top 10 women water scientists and is a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, College of New Scholars, Artists, and Scientists. Thank you so much, merci, miigwech, and I'll now, Sapna, turn it back to you.
Thank you kindly, President Linton, Ambassador, and Mr. Mejia for those welcoming remarks. And I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. And as President Linton mentioned, I'm a limnologist, and a limnologist is a scientist who studies inland waters, and in my case, lakes. And before we head into the panel, I wanted to give a brief scientific understanding of the effects of extreme climatic events on our freshwater systems. Climate is changing. And in response, we're observing an increase in frequency and intensity of extreme climatic events. Just in the news over the past week, you would have heard about record-breaking temperatures, floods, wildfires, and marine heat waves and ocean water temperatures that are approaching over 30 degrees Celsius. Here is a figure from last week, air temperatures on July 6th. So last week we had day after day after day where global air temperature records were broken. And in this panel, what we have are air temperatures, global air temperatures from 1979 to the present date. And what you can see is that last week, our temperatures were 1 degree Celsius over any of the other time periods, any other temperatures over the last 40 years. This may be 1 degree Celsius over the last since 1979, but that translates to about 1.6 degrees Celsius warmer than pre-industrial levels. In this figure here, you can see the spatial distribution of heat waves. So the warmer the color, the warmer the region. And you can see that heat waves were not just isolated to one region. Many places around the world are experiencing these extremely warm temperatures. If temperatures continue to warm into the future, we can expect catastrophic impacts for humans. So a study published a few weeks ago in Nature Sustainability estimated how many people may be unable to survive in their homes, in their regions, if temperatures increase by 2.7 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. So this figure, this map represents in regions in purple are regions where temperatures are going to be too high for humans to survive. That is the home for 2 billion people. When might this occur? 2.7 degrees Celsius seems like it could be a long ways away, but if we continue emitting greenhouse gas emissions at current rates, that could be as early as the 2040s, so 20 years from now. And if we begin mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, that could be in the 2070s. The study suggested that maybe 1 billion people could migrate and move to colder, cooler regions. But that means that 1 billion people are likely to perish. And this loss is going to be inequitable. What do heat waves mean to water quality in our freshwater systems? This is a figure from a study published just a few days ago in the Science of the Total Environment, where they examined heat waves on Lake Taihu in China. And here you can see like a graphical representation of what lake conditions might be like under a heat wave scenario. And so what they found in Lake Taihu, and this is actually representative of many lakes around the world, is that as air temperatures increase, water temperatures increase. And during prolonged heat waves, sometimes the water temperatures can stay quite elevated for a long time. That affects the organisms that live within the lake's waters. For example, freshwater fish require a pretty narrow they have pretty narrow thermal tolerance. So if water temperatures are elevated for a sustained period of time, that can affect the growth, survival, and reproductive abilities of freshwater fishes. Another thing that happens is something called hypoxia in the deeper regions of the lake. Hypoxia is a scientific word to explain declining oxygen concentrations. And so we see in Lake Taihu, but also lakes around the world, lower oxygen concentrations in the summer that again stress the wildlife that live within the lakes. Increased temperatures, air temperatures, and water temperatures also promote algal growth. And what we tend to observe is increased algal blooms. And in this case with Lake Taihu, that created large cyanobacterial blooms. And cyanobacteria is a toxic algae that causes illness in humans and wildlife. And so what we're seeing not only in Lake Taihu in China, but in lakes around the world is heat waves degrading water quality for many different lakes. Climatic extreme events can also appear in the form of changes in precipitation, either heavy storm events where large rainfalls can occur in very short periods of time, like we observed in New York State last week, or longer periods of drought. Both affect freshwater quality and quantity. Here's a nice animation from NASA that uses climate models to estimate future drought risk in North America. And what you can see is that many regions in North America may be facing increased drought risk within this coming century. But what has this meant for freshwater storage? So a study published a few weeks ago in Science looked at the amount of freshwater storage held by lakes over the past 30 years. And what you can take a look at are these red circles. So these red circles represent water loss over the last 30 years. And what this study noted was that 53% of lakes have actually experienced declining water levels and water storage, and affecting 2 billion people that live within these watersheds. Why? It's a combination of factors, including warmer temperatures, increasing evaporation, alterations in precipitation patterns, and increased human consumption that are all contributing to these changes in water quantity. A common theme that emerges is that the loss of access to clean water is not equitable. There's inequitable access to clean water, and marginalized communities are disproportionately affected by water insecurity, in particular women. And this brings us to our panel, our esteemed panel for today. Today, we will hear from Dr. Jessica Vandenberg from the University of Victoria, who will be sharing the historical context of Indigenous communities in Canada, followed by Ms. Swanee Kielsen, founder and CEO of Global Water Promise, who will share the plight of African girls and women facing water insecurity. Next, we will hear from Dr. Nicolas Jarreau from the Global Water Partnership, who's going to highlight some governance solutions. And finally, Dr. Imran Ali from York University, who will provide a humanitarian context and technological solutions to addressing water insecurity. And so with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Jessica Vandenberg, Assistant Dean, Community and Culture with the Faculty of Engineering and Computer Science at the University of Victoria, to provide her remarks.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my slide deck here. All right, so it's an honor to be here today. Thank you for the esteemed welcome from everybody, and welcome to everyone listening online. These are vital issues, and I'm here to talk a little bit about the desperate cries of water spirit around what First Nations, Métis, and Inuit in Canada are facing. I am going to share a little bit of context first, that here in Canada, we have three demographics of Indigenous people. We have First Nations, our original people who've been here since time immemorial, Métis, who grew out of unions between Europeans and First Nations families back when the fur trade and colonization began, a very different demographic than First Nations, even though there are a lot of cultural aspects that are shared. And our Inuit to the north, whose journey is very different again from First Nations, Métis, Inuit. And all three of these demographics are affected by the water crisis and climate change especially. So here, often what us as Indigenous people call North America is Turtle Island. In Turtle Island, a lot of First Nations, Métis, Inuit people have followed natural law since time immemorial. And so when water is affected, we are affected. What the elders and knowledge keepers teach us is that we are the water and we are the land. And so what happens to the water and the land happens to us and our people. And this is the same with all peoples. We are made up of water. And so if water is affected, we as people are also affected. I just wanted to quickly ground in relation to where I'm from. And so I am from the UNiTAR First Nation here in Northern Alberta, what is known as our province of Alberta. It's in Treaty 8 territory, but I'm what is called a 60 scoop survivor. So I grew up in the foster adoption system in this area here, which is still Northwest Alberta, and a couple of different rural farms, and found my way to the University of Alberta, where I took my 2 engineering degrees. I now work here for the University of Victoria, which is out in the province of British Columbia in the unceded territory of our nations, our Lackawanna nations out here. And so we stand on traditional territory of the Songhees, the Squamish, and Wasanish people, and recognize both the Métis and Inuit who also make their homes here as well. So when we talk about water issues, we do need to appreciate the complexity of working with our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. And we need to acknowledge that oppression and colonization that happened here in Turtle Island. So about 500 years ago, when folks were starting to come to colonize North America, it had a very profound effect on our nations today. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that history. And so as colonization happened, starting with the doctrine of discovery, as explorers came, as Europeans and the English and the French and the Spanish all had a lot of profound effect on the country, and soon borders began to form, what happened to Indigenous people was pretty catastrophic. It has been coined as cultural genocide. We know we had impact from slavery. We know there was impact from the effect of disease on the population numbers. Taking our First Nations population, of course, from 100% in Turtle Island down to just above 10% now in Canada. Through legislated acts, we had residential schools, which you may or may not have heard of, but they were schools that our Indigenous children were placed into. They were subject to all sorts of abuse in order to achieve assimilation into what was termed civilized populations. There were 139 registered residential schools in Canada. What is often not talked about is the 700 day schools who had the same tactics used against the children. The difference between residential and day schools were that residential schools, the children were boarded at the school. Day schools, they went to the school and still returned to their home. But the same abuse happened in order to work towards that cultural genocide. We had segregation as well in terms of medical care. There was 29 Indian hospitals running within Canada as well. I myself was born in an Indian hospital in what's known as Edmonton, Alberta, and that hospital has since been closed. But we know there were similar tactics being used in those hospitals, things like medical testing against our First Nations Métis Inuit cousins. We know the Métis journey was around taking the land away and scattering throughout population of Canada. We know they formed into road allowance communities, making their homes in the ditches and utility corridors next to highways. Here in Canada, the last road allowance community that was known to be active was in around 2004, 2005. And we also know that the last residential school closed in 1997. And so it wasn't so long ago that these active oppressive tactics were being taken against First Nations Métis Inuit people. We also had the 60 scoop, of which I am a survivor. This is where Indigenous children were placed in the foster adoption system to be raised by European families rather than in their home communities. All of this took an effect on our First Nations Métis Inuit population here in Turtle Island, and still has a lot of effect of how we are and where we are today. And so just thinking about the tactics being taken, this was quoted from our first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald in 1883. So when the school is on the reserve, the child lives with its parents who are savages. And though he may learn to read and write, his habits and training and mode of thought are Indian. He is simply a savage who can read and write. It has been strongly impressed upon myself as head of the department that Indian children should be withdrawn as much as possible from the parental influence, and that the only way to do that would be to put them in the central training industrial schools where they will acquire the habits and modes and thoughts of men. And so the approach here in Canada was that of assimilation. And so I just wanted to share a little bit of that historical context because it's very relative today. When we have oppressive legislation like the Indian Act still in effect, what that means is that there are remnants of this that need to be navigated in order to address the basic human right of water. The Indian Act not only gave leave to build and operate residential schools, it also denied things like status for women, which we heard just from the opening remarks as well. Intersectionality is a huge effect from the water crisis. And we'll hear more from my esteemed panelists on this as well. Residential schools came, the reserve system status, membership status, an ability not to use the legal systems, not to use the education systems, a lot of things that were prohibited. And again, a lot that enabled cultural and language genocide. I'm not going to go through all of the aspects of the Indian Act, but what I wanted to emphasize with this slide is that the Indian Act is still active today. So we still have this oppressive piece of legislation that needs to be addressed in order to, or navigated in order to address the water crisis that affects our First Nations Métis Inuit communities. So here in Canada, we have a number of reserves set across Canada. They're the red dots shown on this map. I know this is a bit of a small view here, but all of these reserve systems work with the federal government in order to take the same infrastructure capital funding. And so you can imagine with over 634 reserves in Canada, a pot of funding that has a competitive system in order to access infrastructure funding is very difficult to navigate. It's very difficult to ensure that all of those communities have access to clean water when they need it, nonetheless wastewater collection as well. And so what happens is there's a huge impact on health. And so the reality for water is that right now we still have 28 long-term drinking water advisories in effect in 26 of our communities across this country. There has been active efforts in order to address these. So since November of 2015, 142 long-term drinking water advisories were lifted, but it doesn't mean that this is sustainable, nonetheless consistent and with the assurance that the water systems on our reserves are going to have the clean water that's needed for healthy communities. We know the reality for water is that these effects that you're going to hear about today and already know about from climate change and industry does affect the water sources. We know water sources are dwindling and things are shifting. And so for especially the small remote communities, this has a huge impact on their community. If there's only one clean water source and then suddenly it's affected by surrounding industry or impacted by climate change as well. We have this suppressive piece of legislation in effect for our First Nations people. The Mejia and the Inuit have similar legislation and regulation that also is oppressive. There's complex land ownership, which does not allow for the reserves to own their own land. And so they don't have a taxation system that provides their community with infrastructure funding. And again, has to navigate a complex system that is controlled and run by the Canadian government. Which leads to limited infrastructure funding. So having enough funding to ensure proper and operated water treatment plants and access to water is a huge aspect of it. In this space as well, because it's complicated and because the truth and reconciliation movement in Canada is still fairly new, there's a lot of people still learning the truth. So there isn't a lot for consultants and professionals that have experience working with community. There's many of us, like myself, as professional engineers that are of Indigenous descent that are working in this space to be bridges, but there's not very many of us at this time. There's a lot of efforts in the outreach and capacity building side of things in order to help with that, but we still have a long way to go to ensure that we have properly trained consultants and professionals who know how to work with community and have understanding of the truth. Along with that, the communities are still healing very much from intergenerational trauma and community hurt. Both my parents are residential school survivors, and the effects of that on myself and my siblings and in the community, you can see actively. It takes a long time to heal the trauma. And so the need for allyship, for advocacy, for industry to have a voice and influence in this area is crucial. So what can we do? It always starts with awareness, understanding the truth of what is happening within Turtle Island, within the country of Canada, within our provinces and our local communities, creating urgency and using your voice in positions of privilege. The United Nations has long been a supporter of advocating for First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and the state of affairs. Standing up this Global Water Academy is a huge step in this, in creating that urgency and hearing the voice of leaders around the world crying out for help and advocacy and providing pathways to solutions for this. Proper engagement with the community is vital. One of the hardest things is when people come into community and automatically assume they have the answers. It's working with community, meeting them where they're at in terms of healing, helping to restore cultural and language, and helping to restore the pride and dignity and leadership within the community while we find the solutions together. Addressing the need for change for the Indian Act. We can't simply do away with the Indian Act. There needs to be something in between that, a governance piece of document that manages the change until we can get to a progressive piece of legislation, a different land ownership and funding system. So again, we can access different infrastructure dollars for our communities. And of course, aid for healing and cultural and language restoration throughout everything is vital. We ask, of course, that any leaders commit to ongoing support of things like UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and the Truth and Reconciliation Journey. So reconciliation in this country is really about healing and healing relationships and building trust and working out differences. So the phrase forgive and forget is a popular phrase used in reference to reconciliation. However, John Paul Lederach maintains that true reconciliation is not forgive and forget, nor does reconciliation involve remembering, justifying, and repeating. True reconciliation, Lederach, is to remember and change. And this quote comes from the Aboriginal Healing Foundation in 2008. around about the time when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was active within Canada. And so reconciliation is what we're trying to get to, reciprocity, building relationships that heal, but also move forward together, because we as First Nations, Métis, Inuit people hold answers to water stewardship, hold methods and ways that can be integrated in order to really move forward and walk together, ways that we can ensure sustainability of the environment and address climate change. First Nations knowledge dates back to time immemorial for many thousands of years, where the balance with nature, with water crisis, the observations of things that happened hold keys to what we need for sustainability into the future. So that is what I wanted to share today. Again, it's been an honor and privilege to be able to speak with you, and I'm always happy to continue the conversation. So you're welcome to contact me at any time. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jessica, for sharing your important words and sharing your historical context. I especially loved how you shared what we can do, what all of us can do, what leaders can do to help solve this, work towards this crisis. So thank you, Jessica, for those words. And I just wanted to let the audience know, we now have 150 people in our audience, so thank you all for joining, is that you can use the question and answer feature at any time to pose your questions for any of the speakers. So next up, we will hear from Ms. Swanee Kielsen. She is the founder of Global Water Promise, a US-based international nonprofit working in development countries to bring water security, sanitation, and hygiene to help end period poverty in vulnerable populations. And Swanee, I will be sharing your slides. And so you just let me know when to move to the next slide. Over to you, Swanee.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you. I'd like to extend my gratitude for being invited to speak with such an esteemed panel. I would also like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Sapna Sharma for sharing this platform with me. So as we understand, we have studied the current global water crisis and the growing lack of fresh water to meet our children's needs. There is a looming crisis that is an extension of water insecurity. And water insecurity takes a greater toll on women, as we know, and children, because they are often the ones responsible for collecting water. You can go to the next slide. The next slide, thank you. And when water is further away, it requires more time to collect, which often means less time for school, particularly for girls. A shortage of water in schools impacts students' enrollment, attendance, and performance, because carrying water long distances is also an enormous physical burden and can expose children to safety risk and exploitation. So what I have discovered is what I have coined the shadow pandemic in this particular region of Ghana, in a remote area. And I have studied the relationship between water insecurity, period poverty, and transactional sex between menstruating young girls. And I've come across the relationship that they all have with the growing issue of climate change, and climate change being one of the main reasons of water insecurity. The first issue is that these young girls and women do not have access to clean water. So what that led me to was last year I was in Ghana conducting a water research study, and this study actually was walking the footpath with these young girls. And you could move to the next slide. And what we uncovered was that the young girls were talking about the issue of not having clean water during their menstrual cycles. And the question came up, well, what exactly do you do? And they said they often traded sex for bottled water. But in addition to that, if they did not have sanitary products, they then began to trade sex for sanitary pads. You can move to the next slide. And here you see where I was actually walking the actual path with some of the girls. And this was about a 35-minute walk. And there were a lot of risk involved because there were men coming out of different corners and trees and areas. And the young girls had explained to me that they were actually looking for sex. And if at the time they're already walking to collect water from a river that was contaminated. And at the time, if the men were offering or luring them with water or with sanitary pads, that they were really forced into this sexual, transactional sex type of situation. And so a lot of times people didn't really understand the girls and why they were resorting to that. But what I uncovered was that poor hygiene during menstruation can pose serious health risks, urinary tract infections, reproductive health issues. So all of these require access to adequate sanitary supply and clean water. And if this is not provided to young girls, then they're actually forced. They really have no other choice but to have men take care of them with which is nothing more than sexual exploitation. We can go to the next slide. And this is actually one picture that really captured my heart, because this was just normal for this young lady. She was actually supposed to go to school that day, and she couldn't go to school because she had to choose between if she could have clean water and menstrual pads, and if she could go to school. And her choice was to not go to school and take this long path, hoping that someone would offer her money so that she would be able to take clean water back home and use it for cleaning herself, cooking, and also if she could use the money for menstrual pads. So we can move to the next slide. So let's talk about the shadow pandemic. So in this particular village, it's the Ifutu Mampong village in the central region of Ghana. And I had conducted a study there of more than about 50 girls. And many of them said that the lack of access to clean water was the reason that they were led down this path of trading sex for clean water and pads. And they were saying that the reason that they didn't come forward to discuss this with maybe parents or heads of schools was because there's a lot of stigma associated with menstruation in these rural communities that causes young girls to not understand the educational part of their menstrual health, but also the shame that is placed on menstruation. We can move to the next slide. So I'd like to share a video of a young girl. I kept her face covered because she is still a child. And this is an interview with her, as well as another young lady who explains why she is having sex for pads. Do we have the volume?
The volume isn't, oh, I have to unmute myself. Okay, I will try it one more time.
What is your name?
My name is Deborah Quincy.
How old are you?
I'm 15 years old.
Do you attend school?
Yes, please.
Why do you sell sex for pass?
Because my family, we don't have money. And sometimes we even beg for food. That's why.
So how do the men access you for sex?
They sometimes call me or I approach them.
How do they know that you need pads?
I sometimes beg them for money. That's, yes.
Okay, thank you.
We can.
What is your name? What is your name? Emigrahinaka. How old are you? 17 years. Do you attend school? This years. Why do you sell sex for pad? Because my parents don't have money to give me, and they don't do anywhere. There is no money in the house, and there is poverty. That's why. Do the men call you for sex? Please, yes. How do they call you for the sex? And how do they approach you for sex? Because they know that in my family, we don't have money. And sometimes I go to my friends for money for pads and those. So my friends go tell them, that's why they ask me for that. So how do the men know that you need pads? I sometimes call them on phone and sometimes go to them for the pad. Okay, thank you.
So as heartbreaking as it is, these were two young ladies who were willing to come forward and discuss why they are involved in the sex trade. And what is disturbing is that the more we get into water insecurity with climatic events, the more we will see these types of things take place, but yet we won't see any accountability for men because these are underage girls. So more so the relationship it also has a relationship with global governance and trying to get these local governments in these particular regions to hold men accountable for exploitation of these young girls. And after understanding that the issue, and it was very severe and important to me, I was able to galvanize my supporters back in the US, and we were able to give at least maybe about 200 girls, and this is just one picture of these girls who were able to get pads and for at least the time being not have to resort to such harsh realities of prostitution and the sex trade for pads. This is actually the Ifutu Mempong village in the central region of Ghana, where these young girls do not have access to water and menstrual hygiene products. We can move to the next slide. So this is more of what my study basically examined and revealed during a cross-sectional behavioral study. And it found that, just as I've been saying, that because we're in such a dire case of water scarcity, it's affecting many areas, not just the collection process, not just the clean water access, but it's leading to more extreme issues when it comes to the basic commodities that young girls and women need for their reproductive health. So this core group of girls, 25, were interviewed, and it revealed that 52% of them had in some capacity traded sex for pads and clean water. And we did examine the result of pregnancy as well as sexually transmitted infections, and the overall impact was extremely significant. And many of the girls were, they had dropped out of school, and many of them were also facing the shame of sexually transmitted infections in these areas where treatment is also unavailable or scarce. And again, we were looking for accountability because most of the information I received was from men who actually did not want to be on camera, but they actually did confirm that they do often lure these young girls into sexual acts because they know that they do not have access to pads and clean water. So what we have been doing at Global Water Promise, we want to restore dignity. And that means that advocating for environmental protections for women and girls exploited by transactional sex. And our recommendation is for everyone to be involved, government, non-government, so we can intensify their water provisions in vulnerable communities. And we believe that addressing this brings attention to this shadow pandemic. And right now, what we have done, we've partnered with, in this particular village, to bring clean water as well as pads on a monthly basis to this village, as well as a partnership with the Royalty Girl Foundation. And we're asking that we all look at the relationship that water insecurity has with period poverty and how it creates this survival mechanism for these young girls. But we also want to start an awareness to who should be held accountable, because these are young girls. And so as we move to the next slide, these are some of the girls that we have provided pads to in local schools. And as we move into the end of this presentation, I would like to take a moment for you guys to look at the names of more than 50 girls that came forward who wanted you to know, all of us to know, that these are the girls that as young as 12 years old are menstruating and who have had transactional sex for menstrual pads and clean water. And I really thank you for this opportunity. I know that this list is just a short list, but I appreciate you all taking the opportunity to see that we do have a crisis, and it is at the forefront of water insecurity. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunny, for all of your work and for sharing the stories of these girls and raising awareness so that we can all work together to hopefully make this not a reality for these girls in the future. Okay, so moving forward, we're going to hear from Dr. Nicholas Giroux. Dr. Giroux is Senior Specialist, Engagement and Partnerships Development at the Global Water Partnership, and he will be addressing topics of governance today.
Yes, hello, can you hear me well?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great, thank you, Sapna, for everything, for the organization and for this introduction. Thank you to York University, of course, and President Lenton. Your Excellency, dear colleagues from the UN and fellow panelists and distinguished guests. I think after hearing the last two presentations, we really need a small moment of reflection, in the sense that when we hear often, almost always in presentations about development, about the water crisis, about climate change, that women and girls are disproportionately affected by the water crisis, that vulnerable communities are disproportionately affected by the water crisis. But I think often we don't really know, we don't really understand what that means. And I think the last two presentations have really helped bring home the terrifying impact that the water crisis is having on real people. And what I want to talk about today is some of the longer term solutions that at the Global Water Partnerships we've engaged in to, in particular, put gender at the heart of action on water, and especially the longer term solutions beyond also the immediate humanitarian response. Now, we all know that the water crisis is a climate crisis. What less of us know is that the water crisis is also a governance crisis. Because of the failure at the governance level to recognize the complexity and interconnection of water with every other sphere of land use and of life, maybe the fragmented institutional setups that people are required to address the problem, sometimes the excessive focus on single objectives, the excessive focus on maybe on technical solutions. And again, here, I want to be very clear, technical solutions are essential, and we're going to hear about them in the next presentation. They are necessary and essential, but not sufficient. And I think more importantly, because decision-making in the countries which are often most affected by the water crisis are often top-down, not so participatory as they should be, and characterized by gender equality in terms of representation. So it's not just in terms of the impact on women and girls of the crisis, but it's then these people who are the most impacted are also the less well represented in the decisions that need to be taken to solve the problem, which is why the governance crisis is also in many ways a gender crisis. So water resilience really requires a participatory and gender transformative approach. So one of these approaches that we at the Global Water Partnership use extensively is what is called integrated water resource management. And the idea here is that we recognize the interconnected nature of water with other land uses, with the ecosystems around us. We recognize the need for multi-stakeholder partnerships for all different sectors of society to be involved. We recognize the need for a range of objectives to be solved together rather than a single objective approach. And we also are very much focusing on a process-oriented approach. So the long term, the long game. So working on the prevention so that in the end, the cure is maybe not so necessary. So we're working on the governance systems and how you can strengthen the water governance system. And more importantly, for the purpose of today's presentation, is the approach of participatory water governance. So really based on the meaningful engagement, and in particular of the engagement of women and girls, but also of communities that traditionally will have been excluded or marginalized from the water dialogue, and yet who are among the most impacted. Our work in integrated water resource management is grounded in the Dublin Rio principles, which look at fresh water as a finite and vulnerable resource that is essential for everyone and every sphere of economic activity and of life, on the idea that water development and management should be based on a participatory approach. And very importantly, on principle 3, which is that women play a central part, as we've seen in the previous presentation, in the provision, the management and the safeguarding of water, and yet their voice is not represented as it should be in the policy dialogue. And finally, recognizing that water has an economic value, which doesn't mean we should charge the most vulnerable communities for the use of water, but rather the fact that recognizing the cost of bringing water to where it should be, and therefore investing to make sure that that cost is met. So we have essentially 2 flagship programs dealing with water, gender, and climate, which I will go through. The first one, which is called WAGDEP-G and focused very much in Africa at the moment, really builds capacity at the governance level and at the programming level to build, insert gender transformative approaches into all new investments and work to create a better water infrastructure and governance system. Then we have a support program for Sustainable Development Goal 6, and in particular Target 651, which is dedicated to integrated water resource management. And as you will see later, one of the ways we track that is also through our gender indicators. And finally, we capture all these best practices and lessons learned from people who are working on the ground in different countries through our IWRM Action Hub, which is an online platform where we have created communities of practice where people can interact and exchange their best approaches and practices. And I will actually invite some of our fellow panelists perhaps to join some of those communities after this event. So our goal overall is to make sure that at least 20 countries have implemented development plans, strategies, and commitments that contribute meaningfully to gender inclusion and gender equality through water secure development. And gender mainstreaming, we define it as not just paying lip service to the gender issue, but fully integrating gender perspectives at all levels of water planning, management, governance, decision-making across sectors. And it can include all sorts of tools that we will see a little bit later. So in other words, connecting very much SDG 6 and SDG 5 in this respect. So the WAGDEP-G program. So this starts with the recognition of huge gender inequalities in access to water, but also the burden of providing water. and the impact of the water crisis. And also beyond the gender gap, the fact that a lot of disadvantaged communities living in high poverty situations are again disproportionately affected by the climate and water crisis. And that the vulnerability to climate change in a sense is compiled by other forms of marginalization, and that the technological solutions, while necessary and essential, are maybe not keeping up with the increasing water demand and maybe not reflecting this gender gap in particular. So the idea is that how do we get all these plannings and investments and institutional building through water and climate change adaptation to include a gender transformative vision, which right now perhaps isn't there. And in doing so, also improve the water situation itself, which is very important. It's an important outcome of the program. So we want to transform gender inequalities at scale, starting in Africa, but then moving on to other parts of the world, and really promote gender transformative planning, decision-making. This requires a real paradigm shift in many cases. We work, the initial 5 countries were Tunisia, Uganda, Zambia, Benin, and Cameroon. But again, the program is now being expanded, and it falls under the umbrella of the Continental Africa Water Investment Program, or the AIP, whose secretariat is hosted by GWP's Office for Africa. But which includes, this is a program that includes a huge range of other partners, the African Union Development Agency, the African Ministers' Council on Water, the governments of the African countries themselves, UN Women, and a lot of other partners. So it's really a collaborative effort reflecting a common vision to try and address at least part of this situation. The other angle is our support to countries around the world this time to implement SDG 651. So we help countries essentially to develop action plans and to upgrade their policies and governance frameworks in a participatory way through a multi-stakeholder dialogue. We help them to come up with action plans and to find financing for those action plans to move towards an integrated water resource management approach. And very early on, we recognize that this cannot happen unless it's happening in parallel with a gender mainstreaming effort in water resource management. So we regularly monitor progress towards that. We've been monitoring it since 2017, but unfortunately, a lot of the countries that we talk to don't always answer the gender question. They may not understand fully the relevance. And in fact, as we see, the results are not always, we're not always there in terms of what should be done. In terms of our analysis, what does it mean, what should be done? We're not here to tell people how things should be done. Rather, this analysis stems from the information that's coming from the countries that we work with. We've looked at answers provided by 23 different countries where we work to say, what does it mean to have a truly gender transformative program? And we found that on average, in countries where this was actually being done, there were 7 kind of common points or enablers of gender mainstreaming. First of all, the actual commitment, explicit commitment to gender mainstreaming at the leadership level, at the national level, but also egalitarian legal frameworks, so enabling environment in that respect, which are integrated into law, into policy, into strategies. And then money, you need funding. So you have earmarked funding that is specifically allocated to gender mainstreaming for water resource management, and it then is actually spent for that purpose. Supportive framework, so wider, more enabling environment to enable the participation and parity of women in these policy discussions. Monitoring systems, because unless you can show that it's happening, it's not happening. So centralized monitoring systems overseen by a national body, for example, the National Statistics Offices, to really design and measure gender responsive indicators. Investments in education, of course, awareness raising, capacity building, and then, of course, a multi-stakeholder angle. Everybody is in this together. You need to work across sectors to make this happen. So as a result, for the moment, we have at least 6 actions from 5 countries in our area of work. which are explicit about their intent to advance gender mainstreaming. Although sometimes, of course, these gender considerations are wrapped up into other considerations as well. If going ahead and supporting these actions would actually also help these countries increase their score in terms of the efficiency of their integrated water resource management. So it's not just about addressing the gender issue itself, but it's actually by addressing the gender issue, you're improving the quality of water resource management. And this is a very important point. So I think I will stop here at this stage. And of course, we'll be happy to take questions during the discussion. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Giroux, for your very interesting presentation. Last up, we have Dr. Imran Ali. Dr. Ali is an experienced aid worker and engineering researcher who seeks ways to improve public health engineering in humanitarian response. Dr. Ali, I pass the floor over to you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Professor Sharma. Thank you, President Lenton, Mr. Mejia, and Ambassador Gallegos for bringing us together for this very much needed conversation. Just to start off, I want to really thank my fellow panelists, Dr. Vandenberg, Ms. Kielsen, Dr. Giroux, for illuminating this challenge and really showing us the gravity and seriousness of water from the unique perspective of all of your works. You've really lit a fire for us, so thank you very much for your presentations. Now, I'm going to be pretty quick here. I'm going to try to just draw on my experience as a humanitarian aid worker and as an engineering researcher working on public health engineering and humanitarian emergencies. And what I want to do is draw out the connection between climate change, water, and humanitarian crises, and what we can do about it, especially here in the university. So quickly, some numbers. Today, there are about 275 million people around the world who are in need of urgent humanitarian assistance. That's a mind-boggling number. That's 3% of the global population. And these numbers are increasing really rapidly. There's been a 250% increase in just the past 7 years, and the rate isn't slowing down. I started working in this area about 10 years ago, and we now live in a very different world from even then, just a decade ago. Now, many in need of humanitarian assistance are forcibly displaced. That's more than 1% of the world's population, over 108 million people, according to latest figures from UNHCR. Now, disasters and extreme weather events such as flooding and drought are responsible for many and majority of forced displacements worldwide, as well as famine, food insecurity, and conflict. Now, when people are displaced, the normal functioning of life falls away. Everything becomes a matter of survival. People need food, water, shelter, medicine, protection, and providing these essentials is a central focus of humanitarian response efforts. Water is one of these life-preserving essentials, but water also cuts both ways, both when there's too much of it and when there's too little. Displaced people, more than anyone else, are uniquely vulnerable to this duality of water in their raw exposure to the world. Now, these two photos you see on the screen here were taken months apart in the same refugee camp in South Sudan. This camp exemplifies what water means for displaced people more than any other place that I've ever seen. For part of the year, there's acute water scarcity. People don't have enough to drink, to maintain hygiene in the ways that they're accustomed to water their livestock, and water-washed diseases like trachoma, dysentery, and others stalk the population. When the rains come, and they come in great waves here, it makes this whole area a vast swamp. It's a floodplain of the Nile, and there winds up being sewage-laden floodwater everywhere, creating a perfect storm for waterborne diseases like cholera and hepatitis E to spread like wildfire in the community. Now, of the 5 leading causes of infectious disease outbreaks in refugee camps globally, 3 of them are waterborne: cholera, watery diarrhea, and hepatitis C, and there are many others as well. Many of these infectious diseases are expected to become even more prevalent with changing vector ecologies, rising temperatures, and increasing droughts and flood. For example, cholera outbreaks are known to be linked to increased water temperatures. So going back to the slides that Professor Sapna showed in the beginning, as increased temperatures are prevalent in waters around the world, we would expect there'll be higher risk of cholera into the future. Water-related illnesses are linked to both water scarcity and poor quality of water that is available. Already today, roughly half of the world's population is experiencing acute water scarcity for at least part of the year. And many of the world's forcibly displaced people are in these regions that face considerable water stress at present. The World Meteorological Organization projects that the number of people facing severe water scarcity is going to increase with climate change and population pressures into the future. Now, natural disasters both create displacement as well as threaten the health and well-being of displaced populations. And there's an unmistakable trend that natural disasters, many of them driven by climate instability, are on the rise around the world, including floods, droughts, extreme heat, and storms. Now, people only flee their homes when they have no other option, when to stay means that you may not survive. The places that people flee to then are necessarily on the very fringes of survivability, a unit of geographic distance between living and not living. These margins of survivability are today being pushed outwards into ever-increasing swathes of the global population by a changing climate. A recent commentary in The Lancet by colleagues at MSF, Doctors Without Borders, describes what humanitarian responders are seeing on the front lines of humanitarian emergencies today. They write that the climate emergency is a humanitarian and health crisis. Extreme weather events, heat stress, declining air quality, changes in water quality and quantity, declining food security and safety, and changes in vector distribution ecology threaten all of us. Humanitarian agencies are now seeing how these problems are putting millions of people around the world at immediate risk of famine and death. What we've seen firsthand is that deepening water scarcity, more frequent drought, and more devastating floods means more forced displacement and more infectious disease affecting displaced populations. These threaten to drive social instability and conflict, in turn driving more displacement. The negative feedback loops that we know now characterize the climate system are mirrored by negative feedback loops in our human systems as well. Now, what can we do in the face of this? There was another paper published just last month in The Lancet on the global burden of disease associated with water, sanitation, and hygiene. What it shows is that safe water, sanitation, and hygiene could save 1.4 million lives per year and prevent 74 million disability-adjusted life years, a considerable burden of morbidity. We've already made major strides in improving access to safe water and sanitation globally, and there's more that we can do, especially to those who are most vulnerable in crisis settings. Now, at York, we're leading research on how we get safe water to people living through humanitarian emergencies globally. At the Dahdaleh Insitute for Global Health Research, I lead the Humanitarian Water Engineering Lab, which is working on creating new tools, technologies, and practices to better protect public health during emergencies. Our goal at the lab is to be a bridge between the field and the university, mobilizing the right kinds of expertise to work in collaboration with practitioners and affected communities to address pressing water and health questions that are coming out of the field. One of our flagship projects is called the Safe Water Optimization Tool, or SWOT for short. The SWOT is a water quality modeling tool that uses cutting-edge machine learning and process-based modeling to analyze data that's already routinely collected in humanitarian operations. We use this data to generate evidence-based and site-specific water chlorination targets that help ensure that water remains safe to drink all the way to the point of consumption emergency, which is a major gap right now in humanitarian operations. The SWOT has been demonstrated to improve water safety outcomes in refugee and IDP camps around the world. It's now being deployed by 7 humanitarian organizations across 9 countries as part of initiatives to deliver water up to 500,000 people. And that number continues to grow as we scale the tool up globally. Another area we've been working on is looking at the interaction of chemical water quality in deep, highly mineralized groundwater and severe acute malnutrition in children. This is a response to questions that have come to us from humanitarian responders working in food and water scarce regions during these nutritional crises. We've created operational guidance to help humanitarian responders understand and manage water quality risks in these inpatient therapeutic feeding facilities where very, very sick children receive this treatment. Another activity that we've been leading at the lab is training to build the technical capacity of current responders and the next generation, especially local responders who are based in the countries affected by crises and are leading these responses around the world. Our highly popular humanitarian water engineering course is now in its 4th offering this fall, and we're planning to expand to a whole range of humanitarian engineering training offerings in the near future. So if you're interested in learning more about the SWOT, working on safe water and humanitarian emergencies, about our lab, or taking the humanitarian water engineering course, please reach out. The links are on the screen. I want to thank you all very much. I want to thank the organizers for putting this together. I hope we can all find ways of working together to get safe water, to ensure water access and public health for vulnerable people all around the world. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Imran, for that very inspiring talk. We have just a few minutes before we will wrap up and pass over to Mr. Alex Mejia for some final comments. But I wanted to pose one question to the group. We've heard about a lot of different, you're all in this space working in water insecurity and approaching it from different angles, which is very inspiring and also showcases how complex this problem is. I'd like you to maybe comment briefly on what is the role of technical efforts versus political efforts versus advocacy versus governance solutions to water insecurity, and just get your thoughts on the path forward. And perhaps we'll start with Dr. Vandenberg.
Thanks so much. So as mentioned, it is a multi-pronged approach, and it's always tough when folks are trying to wear all the hats at once. So forming reciprocal relationships, forming partnerships, open and transparent communication is vital. And stripping away competition in this space is crucial, because we all need to move forward together. That's what reciprocity is about. So someone who wears the technical hat in this area, if that's where they're best suited to contribute, contributing at that level is awesome. Those who work in the political realm, those who work in economics, all of that needs to all work together, and the experts from all the areas need to come and move forward at the same way and meet the communities where they're at. It's important that we don't go in with a saviorism type complex, because that of course creates more disappointment, doesn't help to restore that dignity that we heard from one of my colleagues here. That's so crucial in restoration of people to the state that they need to be in, really, to create those safe, healthy, vibrant communities.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Vandenberg, for those comments. I especially liked your comment about we need to build relationships. We don't need to compete with one another. We're all working together towards the same goal. Anyone else would like to comment? Ms. Kielsen?
I would agree. And also, from my perspective, providing women in these vulnerable communities with a voice. And that means dispelling the cultural myths that men control much of the conversation. One of the things I discovered when we were walking to the river to collect water was that the men had said to me, this particular river that is filled with animal feces, human feces, trash, that even on a specific day, a Friday, that the women were not allowed to utilize this river, even though everyone is particularly on the same level of poverty. But on this particular day, a first Friday of the month, that the women could not use the river because there was a cultural myth that they were unclean. And so dispelling these myths that women still do not have the dignity and the respect, even though they're still on the same level as the men. So I think that the first thing we have to do is acknowledge that there is an issue, that this is an issue. Young girls are being exploited, they're underage, and let's try to figure out who do we hold accountable for that. But also just getting rid of these cultural stigmas that continually place women in these particular areas where they won't come forward, where they don't come forward. So I think that's from my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Giroux, do you have some comments?
Yes, I mean, I agree with everything I've heard. I think the only thing I can add is when you're dealing with something as complex as the water crisis, it's very much like medicine. You need both the prevention and the cure. You need the technical solutions, you need the governance solutions, you need to fix the systemic problems in the long term, but you also need to address the humanitarian problems in the short term. And I think that I'm quite glad here because we've got a rather complementary group covering all of those angles.
Yeah, thank you. And finally, Dr. Ali.
Yeah, thank you to everybody for really laying it out really well. I'll speak from an engineering perspective, which is, we think that our technical solutions can fix the world, right? But we have to remind ourselves that Oftentimes what we're doing is just a Band-Aid for what is a much deeper problem. So we have to do the Band-Aid, we have to prevent and help suffering in the moment, but we have to name what the underlying issue is. It could be environmental, it could be political, it could be social, but if we don't do that, we're doing a disservice. We're making that problem persist longer with our Band-Aids without naming what that core is. So we got to do both.
Perfect. That is a great way to end this panel. And I thank you all for presenting today, sharing your expertise, sharing your words of wisdom. I'd like to thank all of our opening speakers for taking the time to support our event, and to everybody in the audience for spending your morning with us and learning about water insecurity. And finally, I would like to pass it over back to Mr. Alex Mejia for some final comments.
Thank you, Professor Sharma. Congratulations to you as well. Our appreciation to you for moderating and leading us, and to all the colleagues at the University of York. But before we go, I just wanted to leave you, and we have literally 2 minutes only, with 2 messages. And the first is, of course, I hope you are looking at my screen, to tell you that there are very many resources that you can find publicly at the UN.org website on the 17 development goals. It's a holistic approach to sustainable development. Remember that. All of the goals are important. The 17, 6, of course, which is what we have focus upon today, and the very many things that you heard, the diagnostics of several sides of the problem, of course, the solutions, but at the same time, in addition to leading you to this source of information, I wanted to finish by inviting you to learn more about the high-level political forum of sustainable development that happens every July. It's happening in New York as we speak. It started last Monday. Next week will be the high-level segment with 180 some countries represented at the ministerial level. And it's very important that we make sure that you are part of the conversation. So this is a public invitation for you to see the proceedings, to present questions if you can. You are able to do so in some of the sessions virtually, remotely. And last but not least, to invite you also, look at the bottom left, to prepare, follow, interact, contribute, join the SDG Summit 2023. It's the midterm review, is very important. The year 2030 is actually around the corner. And on 18 and 19 of September in New York, but globally, because it's also very much offered virtually, under the auspices of the UN General Assembly and ECOSOC, we will have the SDG Summit. So with that, being exactly 1 hour and 30 minutes into the proceedings, I would like, on behalf of UNiTAR, again, to thank everyone, particularly President Lenton. It's quite an honor to work with you, Madam President, and to all of you, our distinguished speakers, particularly to you, dear participant, from so many places. We are here for you, and you are part of the solution as well. Thank you very much to all the best. This meeting is adjourned. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sapna. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for everybody for being here today.